Hello, my name is Bruce Crawford, and I produced a documentary on the Battle of Shiloh. Thank you for purchasing the video, and I would like for you to tell all your friends and neighbors and history teachers about this documentary. I also would like to thank all the reenactors for their time and talent. The video I shot on location, and I did all the editing on it also. At the end of the documentary, Abe Lincoln, played by Dennis Boggs out of Gettysburg, Tennessee, will be giving a Gettysburg Address. Thanks again, and enjoy Bloody Shiloh.
Until sunrise on the morning of April 6, 1862, history had never recorded so many Americans gathered in one place to do battle. And until that point in time, never would so many of our country's families be touched by the tragedies of war. This would be the last sunrise for many who fought on the sides of the North and the South. Of all the battles previously fought on American soil, Shiloh would prove to be the bloodiest. At the 140th anniversary reenactment in April 2002, many of those tragic scenes were recreated. Relive with me now, Bloody Shiloh, the Devil's Own Day, recreated at the 140th anniversary reenactment on April 5th, 6th, and 7th in Mitchie, Tennessee.
To Major General Henry Halleck, Army Headquarters, St. Louis, Missouri. Dear General Halleck, it has come to my attention that a certain Brigadier General by the name of Ulysses S. Grant has the nerve and fortitude to be the kind of leader we need to help break this stalemate in our war with the South. He appears to be a man who is not afraid to take a chance without first considering all the possibilities. He also agrees with my opinion that the waterways of Tennessee need to be secured at all haste. It is my recommendation that you let General Grant lead an expedition into the Tennessee, and I will assume all of the support he needs from Washington. With the advent of the news that the celebrated Confederate General Pierre Beauregard has moved west with 15 new regiments to support Sidney Johnston, I suggest that the expedition be organized at once. I wish you and Grant much success and Godspeed. Sincerely, your humble servant, Abraham Lincoln.
After the war in the East came to a standstill, President Abraham Lincoln began to press Major General Henry Halleck to secure the western states of Tennessee and Kentucky. Confederate President Jefferson Davis gave the command of the western region to Albert Sidney Johnston, who was considered one of the most capable generals in America. Johnston had the near impossible task of securing a region that ranged from the Mississippi River in western Kentucky to the Cumberland Gap that bordered the state of Virginia, with less than 60,000 men. With over 100,000 men in his command, General Halleck gave Brigadier General Ulysses S. Grant the challenge to drive a stake into the heart of the South. The two objectives were Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and Fort Donelson on the Cumberland River. Union control of these waterways would help paralyze the South. On February 6, 1862, 4 ironclad gunboats and 3 wooden gunboats under the command of Flag Officer Andrew Foote attacked Fort Henry. While General Grant marched with 15,000 men to assault the fort by land, the Union gunboats pounded the Confederate fort, and after only 70 minutes were able to silence the guns of Fort Henry, and surrender came easy. The Union Navy, though, would not find Fort Donelson so easy, for it was better fortified and located on higher ground. On February 14th, after exchanging iron valentines for several heated hours, the Union gunboats could not silence the guns of Fort Donelson. After the ironclad Carondelet was disabled by Confederate artillery, the Union Navy retreated. It would be up to Grant's army to take the fort. For 2 days, Grant's men would attack, and the Confederates would counterattack. After receiving reinforcements, Grant had 27,000 men in his command, and the Confederates had less than 15,000. So on February 16th, by order of unconditional surrender, Fort Donelson fell. The bitter pains of defeat rippled through the hearts of the South. Knowing he was outnumbered, Sidney Johnston withdrew his troops from Nashville, and the city was taken by the Union Army without a shot fired. Johnston then joined General Pierre Beauregard in Corinth, Mississippi, to form a new line of defense. Beauregard, after his victory at the First Battle of Bull Run, had won the confidence of many, including Sidney Johnston. Corinth was a valuable railroad center that Johnston and Beauregard felt might be next on Grant's list of places to conquer. Now advanced to a major general, Grant's focus was indeed on Corinth, Mississippi. Under orders of General Halleck, Grant would be joined by General Don Carlos Buell's Army of the Ohio, and with their combined forces of 75,000 men, the Confederates would surely be crushed. Grant chose the high ground of Pittsburgh Landing in Tennessee to become the staging area for his planned siege of Corinth, some 20 miles away. Sidney Johnston, with less than 40,000 men, knew he had to take the initiative and attack Grant before Buell could arrive with reinforcements, which would mean certain doom. On April 2nd, after learning of Buell's movement from Columbia, Tennessee, Johnston gave his generals their marching orders, and at that point, these 4 men, Johnston, Beauregard, Grant, and Buell, were destined to meet and make their mark on history. Late in the afternoon of the 2nd, Hardee's Corps was the first to march and arrived at Mickey's Crossroads in Tennessee on the morning of April 3rd, within 4 miles of Pittsburgh Landing, and made ready for battle. Slow communications, though, from the Adjutant General's office prevented the other 3 corps from leaving in a timely fashion, with some units not leaving till Saturday morning the 5th, the morning Johnston had scheduled for the attack. The narrow roads, dense forest, and deep ravines Grant depended on for protection had caused the delays which entangled Polk and Bragg's corps. With all corps not yet in formation, the attack was postponed until Sunday morning. On the afternoon of the 5th, Grant met with Sherman to finalize plans for Buell's arrival. Also, much discussion, although taken lightly, was devoted to the fact that Union patrols had several recent skirmishes with Confederates, who they considered only to be reconnaissance patrols. Grant believed his enemy to be digging in Corinth, never once realizing that 40,000 Confederates were forming battle lines less than 2 miles away. Grant was so overly confident that he wrote General Halleck stating, "Corinth. It will fall much more easily than Fort Donelson." He felt the Confederates were tired and already beaten. Reassuring his commander, Sherman stated, "I do not apprehend anything like an attack on our position." So life in the Union camp went on unexpected. Veterans were at leisure, and raw recruits were on the field going through their drill.
Attention company. In each rank, count 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1.
At a 4 o'clock meeting in the Confederate camp on the evening of April 5th, General Beauregard expressed concern that the element of surprise was gone because of the skirmishing that had taken place. He felt a withdrawal back to Corinth was their only option. Sidney Johnston, in his calm and collected voice, stated, "I'll still fight 'em, even if it's 1,000,000 of 'em." The rest of his generals agreed. The attack would begin at sunrise on Sunday morning. As campfires burned that Saturday night, Confederate soldiers prepared for the next day's battle, while Union soldiers went to sleep, unaware of the hell that they would face on Sunday morning. For the North and the South alike, it would be their sunrise of destiny. At 3 a.m., the Confederates broke camp to begin their attack. And as they formed up for battle, they all took notice to the unusual beauty of the rising sun. It had been raining off and on for the last few days, so special notice was made to the clear sky and the orange-colored sun. Many made the comment that it looked like the son of Austerlitz, simply translated, the son of the sun. According to battle plan, Hardee's Corps was to lead the attack, followed by Bragg's Corps, then Polk, with Breckinridge Corps in reserve. Within an hour, skirmishers from the 3rd Mississippi, under the command of Major Aaron Hardcastle of Wood's Brigade, began to make their way through the dense woods and the cold morning air toward the Union camps. Also around 3 a.m. that morning, Union Colonel Everett Peabody, who had grown suspicious of enemy activity, sent out 300 men of the 25th Missouri under the command of Major James Powell to patrol the area. At about 4:55 a.m., Powell's men walked into the opening of a field on Fraley's farm, and there they were greeted with a volley from Major Hardcastle's Mississippi skirmishers. Determined to fight, Powell's men returned fire, and when the Mississippians fired their second round, Lieutenant Frederick Klinger of the 25th Missouri fell dead. He was the first casualty in a long 2 days' battle. Hardee's left flank was held by Brigadier General Patrick Cleburne. Cleburne was an Irish immigrant who had served in the British Army. He and his brigade were quickly marching toward the camp of Colonel Jesse Appler of the 53rd Ohio, which was part of Sherman's division. Colonel Appler was an inexperienced elderly man with untrained soldiers facing a brigade of Southerners who were screaming their rebel yell as they charged toward their camp. Cleburne was leading his men out of a deep ravine into the enemy camp when Appler's men opened fire. During close to an hour's struggle, Cleburne lost nearly a fourth of his men, but the rebel yell and the Confederate general's perseverance caused Colonel Appler to lose his nerve. The 53rd Ohio, along with the 77th Ohio, in a sheer panic, fell back towards Shiloh Church. At the developing Union Center, Division Commander Brigadier General Benjamin Prentiss moved forward with the rest of his brigades to support Colonel Peabody. And on a small ridge, he tried to hold back the Confederate time. The flood of gray and butternut uniforms proved to be too much for Prentiss' men, but they gave up their ground only 1 inch at a time. The Confederate drive pushed Prentiss back to his own camp, where he tried to make another stand, but once again, the Confederate momentum couldn't be stopped. Prentiss would fall back once more to a place where he'd make his last stand. A small ridge with a sunken wagon road and a split rail fence would become his fortress. By a chance of events, the Confederates stopped to eat breakfast in his camp, and this would give him the time that he needed to dig in, to face a storm that no man should have to face. Also during this time, Major General John McClernand, Brigadier General W.H.L. Wallace, and Brigadier General Stephen Hurlbut began to move their troops forward to reinforce the line. McClernand went right of center to help Sherman hold the right. Wallace went to the center and left of center to help Prentiss hold the center position. And Hurlbut sent a brigade to support Sherman, and 2 brigades to help hold the left flank. On the far left of the Union line was a small brigade from Sherman's division under the command of Colonel David Stewart, whose camp was now under attack by Chalmers' brigade of Bragg's corps. It had taken nearly 4 hours for the Union Army to form a ragged line of defense, and it had taken almost an equal amount of time for the Confederate Army to establish their offensive. Casualties were already high on both sides, but the worst was yet to come. While General Beauregard was moving his headquarters to Shiloh Church, General Grant was arriving at Pittsburgh Landing, where he received an update on the battle. Grant had made his way down the Tennessee River by steamboat from Savannah. He had stopped only long enough at Crump's Landing to give Lew Wallace his orders to march his division immediately toward the sound of battle and join in the fight. Shortly after his briefing, Grant rode to Prentiss' line just before it began to fall back to the sunken road. He arrived just in time to see Colonel Peabody die from a 5th wound while trying to rally his troops. As parts of Prentiss' division broke and scattered, Grant fell back with the remaining organized troops to the sunken road, and from here he would ride towards Sherman's lines to try and reform his right wing. In the Confederate ranks, Holt's Corps was sent to attack McClernand's position, and Breckinridge's Corps was sent to reinforce the right wing. At the center, part of Hardee's Corps was the first to approach the sunken road. The 3rd Confederate States Regiment, numbering 500 men, tried the first head-on assault. Prentiss' splintered division set off a furious volley that sent the outnumbered Southerners railing back to the safety of the timberline they'd just left. This would be the first of a dozen assaults over the field of death that would soon be called the Hornet's Nest. As Sidney Johnston prepared to attack the Union left, a slight lull developed in the battle that gave both sides time to bring up artillery support. The artillery barrage from both sides was devastating. The Confederate artillery raked the sunken road with heavy fire that kept Prentiss men pinned down and unable to reorganize. Many of the reinforcements from W.H.L. Wallace's division were cut down by the massive fire before they could help Prentiss. In like turn, the Union artillery was able to help slow down the Confederate advance and disrupt their supply. Receiving information that he's being flanked by an enemy division, Johnston sends Jackson's brigade to reinforce Chalmers' brigade. Also, 2 brigades from Breckinridge Corps are sent to the position, only to find that the true movement was Colonel Stewart's fragmented brigade trying to escape the slaughter of the overwhelming fire being raged upon them. Stewart fell back with only a few hundred men and aligned himself with Brigadier General John MacArthur's brigade, which was part of W.H.L. Wallace's division. It took well over an hour and a half for Johnston to recover from this diversion and reform his right wing, which gave the Union ample time to form out their left. Trying to prevent Hardee from flanking him on the right, Sherman fell back to a new position that stretched his men from the Corinth Road to the banks of the Owl Creek. Running low on ammunition, Sherman told Grant he knew it wouldn't be long before he would yield again and fall back or face capture from his enemy. Not far down the battle line, McClernand wasn't faring much better. Although his ammunition wasn't quite as low, McClernand's line had become exposed as Sherman fell back to his new position. Holt's Confederate Corps, being fresh on the field, attacked McClernand's exposed line with all vigor. The Union right shifted slightly again until McClernand found better ground in which to make a stand. Both he and Sherman needed Lew Wallace's division to help reinforce their positions, but Wallace would not arrive till late in the afternoon, too late to join in the first day's battle. His division had spent the best part of the day lost on some Tennessee back roads, asking local farmers for directions, who most certainly didn't have his best interest at heart. As the Union line continues to form on the left, General Hurlbut extends his 2 brigades to the outer edge of the 10-acre peach orchard, which formed an angle that severely exposed his right and left flanks. Seizing the moment, Sidney Johnston sent Statham's brigade smashing into Hurlbut's 2 brigades. The Union general immediately could see his position that he had chosen placed his men in peril, so he fell back across the field to the sunken road, where he aligned his troops with W.H.L. Wallace's position. And for the next 2 hours, Johnston pounded the Union left, while Bragg sent wave after wave across the killing field for the hornet's nest. Frustrated that the center hasn't been broken in over a half dozen assaults and over 3 hours of bombardment, Bragg sends in Colonel Randall Gibson with his brigade. By now, Prentiss infantry and artillery have a strategy that works. Let the poor, full-hearted souls march over the open field, and within 30 yards, give them hell. And that's just what Gibson's brigade got. After his first assault, Gibson fell back with a splintered brigade, but Bragg insisted that Gibson was a coward and demanded that he assault the position again. For a second, third, and fourth time, Gibson led his men in a futile attempt to take the sunken road, but Bragg still insisted that he was a coward for falling back each time. Division commander Brigadier General Daniel Ruggles grew tired of the senseless waste of his division's men and confronted Bragg. Ruggles had a plan that might break the Union center, and Bragg gave him a chance to prove himself. Ruggles assembled 11 batteries of artillery, numbering 62 pieces of fire-breathing death. Never had so many pieces of artillery been assembled to fire on one position, and never had so many men cried for mercy as the fire rained down upon them. While Bragg was attacking the center, Johnston rallied his troops and led the attack on the peach orchard. The momentum of Johnston's attack forced Wallace to give some ground, but the price paid for that ground was high. During the attack, Johnston fell fatally wounded, and at 2:30 in the afternoon, the South lost a great general, and the command of the Army of the Mississippi went to Major General Pierre Beauregard. With the Union right and left both on the verge of collapsing, a major assault on either position could send a panic through the Union ranks and possibly cause the surrender of Grant's entire force. But Beauregard seemed to be preoccupied with breaking the Union center instead. Ruggles' battery was at full force by now, and blazing hot metal toward the Hornet's Nest. Prentiss men were withering away with each volley, but he had promised Grant he would hold his ground at all costs. That promise kept would buy Grant the time he needed to form a final line of defense in the rear, but that promise would also cost Prentiss his freedom later in the day. Meanwhile, on the banks of the Tennessee River, Chalmers and Jackson's brigades, who had been fighting hard, began to push back MacArthur and Stuart. The Union left without a major assault was giving away, and so it also went on the Union right. Sherman and McClernand could not hold their positions any longer, so they began a slow retreat back to Pittsburgh Landing. As the Union right and left flanks collapsed, the Confederate forces began to encircle the Hornet's Nest. Sherman, McClernand, W.H.L. Wallace, and Hurlbut's divisions had fallen back to the ridge near Pittsburgh Landing, where Grant was organizing a last stand. Prentiss' division was left to face the entire Confederate army alone. Even with his ammunition supplies exhausted, and considering the fact he was totally surrounded, Prentiss still had officers who refused to fly the flag of surrender.
They were made of every nation, laid on them bloody plains. There was fathers, sons, and brothers, all numbered with the slain. The wounded men was crying for help from everywhere, and others was a-dying and offering God their prayer. Very early the next morning, we were called to arms again. Unmindful of the wounded and useful to the slain, the battle was renewed again. 10,000 men were killed, and from their deadly wounds the blood ran like a rill. And now my song is ended about them bloody plains. I hope the sight to mortal eyes may never be seen again. I pray to God my Savior, consistent with His will, to save the souls of them brave men who fell on Shiloh's hill.
The sacrifice of his division bought the time Grant needed to dig in and resupply. The remnants of Grant's 4 remaining divisions prepared for the worst as they heard a massive rebel yell of jubilation in the distance. The Confederates were celebrating the capture of Prentiss. To add to his firepower, heavy siege artillery that was to be used on Corinth was unloaded from the steamboats and placed in line with the field artillery Grant was able to salvage from his division. Beauregard, with his army in attack formation again, began to advance on Grant's final position. Once in sight, Grant's artillery, with the aid of the gunboats on the river, began to pound the Confederate right. All of Beauregard's generals began to report that their men would have to resort to a bayonet charge from a lack of ammunition to go around. So at about 6:30 p.m., Beauregard ordered a withdrawal. He felt the next morning he would take Grant by force, or the Union Army would escape across the river during the night. Either way, he felt victory was his. As dark fell, the Confederates celebrated around their fires. But the celebrating would be over with the next rising of the sun of Austerlitz. The next day, as the sun rose over Dixie, General Don Carlos Buell marched with his fresh army of 25,000 men toward Beauregard's sleeping army. While the Confederates slept during the night, Buell had ferried his Army of the Ohio across the Tennessee River, and he was ready to fight. A battle plan between he and Grant was never agreed upon, so both men independently set out to attack the nearest Confederate position at daybreak. Buell moved along the Tennessee River with a front over 1.5 miles wide, and Grant filled the gap between Owl Creek and Buell's right flank with 15,000 men. Of the 40,000 men Grant put on the field the day before, less than 10,000 would join Lew Wallace's fresh division for this day's battle. With a sea of 40,000 men in Union blue facing him, Beauregard was able to muster only 20,000 exhausted, battle-weary Confederates to face the enemy tide. The ground they'd fought so hard for yesterday would be fought for equally as hard today, and this time with less troops and a low supply of ammunition. Buell's skirmishers moved forward in the cool morning air. Their first contact was with a brigade, which was part of Bragg's corps. Overwhelmed by Buell's superior numbers, the Confederates fell back in good order, putting up stiff resistance all the way back to their main line. Beauregard had formed his main line of battle south of the Hamburg Road, where the original Union camps were the day before. Grant, who was moving toward Shiloh Church, found stiff resistance that brought his advance to a halt. And much to Buell's surprise, the Confederates proved to be just as stubborn on his front and refused to give ground. All up and down the battle line, the Union would attack, and then the Confederates would counterattack. For nearly 8 hours, the Union Army tried to smash the Confederates and would gain only inches of ground. The Battle of Endurance had taken shape, but the Confederates were in no shape to overcome the odds against them. By mid-afternoon, Beauregard's men had begun to lose their will to fight and had little ammunition to continue the fight with, so he ordered a withdrawal from the field. On a ridge just south of Shiloh Church, Breckinridge established a line with 12 pieces of artillery to protect the Confederate withdrawal. Grant and Buell's armies were equally as tired and low on ammunition, so neither general pursued the retreating rebels. Both issued orders of recall and retired their troops for the evening. The Confederates made camp only 2 miles away. They were too exhausted to continue any further. Their return to Corinth would come the following day. The next day, while the Confederate army made its way back to Corinth, Sherman marched with 4 brigades and a unit of cavalry to keep an eye on the enemy's retreat. Colonel Nathan Bedford Forrest, along with 350 Confederate cavalry, was assigned the duty of being the rear guard, and they spotted Sherman's advance. At an area known as Fallen Timbers, Forrest decided to catch Sherman by surprise. Forrest ordered a charge that scattered Union skirmishers all over the wooded area, and the swift movement of the Confederate cavalry caught Sherman's infantry by surprise, and they couldn't get their rifles loaded quick enough to stop the attack. Forrest, who was well out in front of his men leading the charge, failed to realize the fact that the rest of his men were held up chasing the skirmishers. He was charging alone towards Sherman and 4 brigades of infantry. He realized his misfortune only when the foot soldiers rushed him, trying to run him through with bayonets. And then rifles began to ring out. One shot hit him in the lower back, but he remained in the saddle, still full of fight. To protect himself from the hostile fire, Forrest scooped an unsuspecting assailant up from the ground and used his body as a shield. Once he had made it to safety, Forrest threw the foot soldier to the ground and rode off to rejoin his men. Forrest was the last man wounded at the Battle of Shiloh. The horrors of the death and destruction from the Battle of Shiloh spilled out all over the countryside. Churches and homes all up and down the Tennessee River became field hospitals for the wounded and mortuaries for the dead. There were too few doctors and no medicine to aid the wounded, so local farmers' wives and a damp cloth would be their only comfort.
Give him to his son on the field.
Hit an artery. Big plan. Let me stop for this. Give that arterial needle right there. Where is it? Here it is. Here it is.
As the news of Shiloh reached the rest of America, the shockwave of the devastation quickened the hearts of all who had a loved one fighting in the war. On both sides, there were over 3,500 dead and 16,400 wounded, and many of those who were wounded would die days and even weeks later from their wounds. Those who recovered physically never thoroughly recovered mentally from the gore and the stench of death on the battlefield. Alarmed by the near defeat of General Ulysses Grant at Shiloh, General Henry Halleck relieved Grant of his command once again, just as he did after the Battle of Fort Donelson. And once again, Abraham Lincoln came to Grant's defense.
To Major General Henry Halleck, Army Headquarters, Pittsburgh Landing. Dear General Halleck, the rumor mill in Washington has been turning out rotten yarns on General Grant, and many here request that I relieve him of his duties. As I have advised you before, I believe in this man's mettle, and as the forge of war heats up, his temper becomes stronger by the day. At this important time in the war, I cannot spare this man. He fights, while others are put to flight. I will leave the final decision of this man's fate in your hands, but I trust that you will do right by me. Godspeed. Your humble servant. A. Lincoln.
Lincoln's intervention persuaded General Halleck not to pursue a court-martial of Grant. As Halleck took command of the Army of the Tennessee, Grant became second in command. But as the war drug on, Grant's true valor and his worth to the Union would prove Lincoln right. Call it a twist of fate, or whatever you will. After the Battle of Shiloh, the sunrise in Dixie would never be the same again.
"Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggle here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather that we be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.